Hello, everyone, and good evening. What a perfect day. It's not been a perfect day. It's been rainy and gross if you're in St. Louis, but what a perfect night to snuggle up with a blanket, maybe a warm cup of tea or something, and listen to two incredible authors chat about an incredible duology, first of all, and I'm sure we'll get a little bit of Lindell's incredible book in there as well. So this is my ideal way to spend a rainy day. So thank you so much for joining us. We are thrilled. My name is Stephanie. I'm with The Novel Neighbor. We're an independently owned and operated, woman-owned and operated bookstore in St. Louis, Missouri. And we have two incredible authors with us this evening who are going to spend some time talking with each other. We're going to hear all kinds of interesting things about Jessica's books. And then we'll also make sure that we do have time for Q&A at the end. So if there's anything that comes up while they are talking, you can leave that comment whether you're watching on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, and we will make sure that we get to your question. So, and then we, of course, our signature this or that questions will come in at the end, which will be a blast. So I am not who you are here to listen to. So without any further ado, let me get to introducing our authors. Our first author is Lindell Clipstone, who writes about monsters and the girls who like to kiss them. What a great opening line. A former youth librarian who grew up running wild in the Barossa Ranges of South Australia, she currently lives in Adelaide, where she tends her own indoor secret garden. She has a bachelor's in creative writing and a graduate diploma in library and information management. And Lyndall is joining us to talk about the amazing Jessica Rubinkowski, who just celebrated a book birthday just a few weeks ago. We could not be more thrilled to talk to Jessica. She grew up in the fields of Illinois beside a haunted house, which I do hope we hear more about. A fan of never sitting still, she picked up Scottish dancing, horseback riding, and general herb lore. Now, when not creating fantastical words to throw her characters into, she can be found baking or gardening. She lives in central Illinois, shout out, with her family and far too many pets to keep track of. Her second novel, the sequel to The Bright and the Pale, was just released this past March. It's called, and we are so excited to hear all about it. Jessica, Lyndall, thank you so much for being here this evening.
Hey, thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Well, first of all, congratulations on reaching the end of the duology. How does it feel to have it all out in the world?
It actually feels really good. It's such a relief because I don't have something I'm constantly needing to work towards anymore. And I'm really glad that, I was able to tell Val's story fully. And now that it's over, I can work on something new. So I've enjoyed it.
Yay. So if anybody hasn't read the first or the second book yet, can you give us a little bit of a spoiler-free overview, elevator pitch of what it's about?
Yeah, I can for the first one, but the sequel, it'll be a little hard.
I feel, it's hard.
The first book is called The Bright and the Pale, and it follows Valeria on her journey to return to a mountain with a group of cutthroats and thieves to steal the wealth inside. But once there, they realize something sinister lurks within. And that sinister thing plays a massive role into the sequel, which follows Val as she, kind of deals with the fallout of making a deal with a god, with a devil, kind of like a devil, really. It's not a great deal, that's for sure.
It's I guess, as you would know from my book, girls making probably not great deals with devils is one of my favorite things to read and write about. So I definitely love that about your book. Was there any particular inspiration behind the story, or?
With the first one, I definitely based it heavily off the Diat Pass incident, which was this mysterious event where 9 experienced hikers went up a pass in the Ural Mountains and didn't come back down. And when they were able finally to find the bodies, the circumstances in which they were found were extremely curious. They were, half dressed out in the snow. Their tents had been ripped open from the inside, like they were trying to escape the inside of the tent. And I remember learning about it, and I watched a movie about it, and I was like, man, what would cause that to happen? And what if it happened not just to a group of campers, but to, an entire town? And so then I kind of started thinking about that and turning it over. And then it kind of fell into with my love of, folklore. and Slavic mythology specifically, since that's where my husband's family's from, in Poland. And that kind of just rumbled around in my brain together until they coalesced, and I came up with The Bright and the Pale. And
That's
then
so
with
cool.
Wrath and Mercy, my inspiration was revenge. I mean, all of us like a good revenge story, and I wanted to write one, so that's what I did.
I think you definitely managed to capture her like feelings of vengeance so well. It was quite cathartic to read. Like, I don't know, I love reading like a character just going absolutely feral.
Me too, obviously, I guess.
It was very fun. I imagine it was a lot of fun to write as well. Because I should have realized your husband's family is from Poland. Is that why you chose to use like a sort of Slavic inspired world?
Yes, it was. So he is second generation, and he specifically really isn't in touch with any of that, but I come from a family of basically mutts, like I'm all sorts of ethnicities thrown together. And so I thought it was so neat that he had such a close tie to, his culture, and he just wasn't interested in it. So I was like, oh, I don't know. I'll research into it, see if I can find anything interesting. And it was sort of for the both of us, since he joined me on the journey of it. And yeah, when I got into the really deep, ancient lore, that's where I found the two brother gods, Billabog and Chernabog. And then I was like, oh, such a cool idea, having two brothers that were also gods, and sort of having a falling out between them. And that's kind of where the concept of that came from. So,
I love that. It's such a cool
things.
Yeah, I love how this sort of like the dual-sided thing is even reflected in the gods, and then like even having like a duology. It's like this real sort of like two halves of a whole sort of thing.
That's a good point. If I was really thinking, I would have done like the Bright and the Pale's the pale god, and the second one was the bright god. Dang.
I think it's sort of, I think it works quite well. Yeah, my partner's family is like, he's second generation Australian from like a Hungarian family, and I'm the same. I'm just like very Anglo stock, so I'm very excited to be like around like such interesting culture. And
yes, do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I mean they're quite in touch with like his grandmother was like, she had come over from Hungary, and so we sort of carry on some of the traditions. Like we cook a lot of the food that she cooked, and it's
I'm so
I think
glad.
the food is probably the best part, but I put it like a lot of the food in Lake Sedge was kind of like based on the food that she would make. So like the apple cake and the all of the cakes that Florence cooks are like Hungarian desserts. So that's
that's so cool.
Yeah, my fun way of living vicariously through. So I think I guess we touched on that a little bit with like the character being sort of feral, angry, whatever. Like Val is such a strong character. It was like, why did you decide to set it from her like point of view and first person? Like, was that like a deliberate choice, or did you just sort of feel like
it was actually, when I was writing the very first draft of The Bright and the Pale, I sat there and I was like, I wrote it in third person, and then I was like, oh, I could add Alik's point of view. And it could be both of their books. And then when I was thinking about it, like, it's such a personal journey and a personal story that I thought it felt best in first person, because really the story wouldn't happen if Val didn't make the choices she made. So it just was focused on her. So I decided to keep it in first person and not do a multiple POV. And that's why I chose that. So.
I love that. I think it worked really well. It made the story like so personal, and like even though it's such a sort of big, high stakes, quite big world with like big stakes, I really loved how her first person narrative kept it so personal as well. Like I think those sort of character driven stories are definitely one of my favorite things to read and write. So I think it was a really cool way to sort of, because you do such amazing expansive world building and that balance of like the really like interior. As someone who struggles with that, I'm like always reading through your work and I'm just like, oh, this is like such good. I love how we swap notes when we're working on books, and like you're always helping me with all the world building.
Seriously, I'm so thankful for your help. I would not have gotten through the romance scenes and the sequel without you.
I can help with the kissing, but not world building. I'm getting there though. Like I think every book I'm sort of suddenly like slowly learning more. But yeah, I was funny because I actually had a really similar like way with Lake Sedge. Like I think I started off writing it as third person, single point of view still, just because that seemed to be like what everything I'd read was, and it didn't quite feel like it was working. And when I switched to first person, it just sort of felt like it unlocked the heart of the story. So
it really does.
Really,
Yeah.
It's really cool how like just a small change like that can sort of be like, oh, okay, yeah, this is like, it's changed so much about it.
I feel like it's when you like, and I feel like you feel it when you hit that.
Yeah, that's sort of like
it
that
feels
feeling
like kind of like a ding, like a bell, where you're like, oh yes, this is right.
Definitely. Like for me, it was sort of like Violetta's character suddenly felt like I knew her so much more when I gave her like that first person voice. And it's just, I don't know, it's such a cool feeling. It's really fun, those moments as a writer.
It is.
When you have this
it's like one of the reasons I love writing, when you finally get one of those moments.
Like the moment of like, oh yes, perfect. Like this just is like, you can just sort of feel on like a gut level that it's a good choice.
Yes, exactly. That's the best way to describe it. Just inside your gut, you know. And yeah, I definitely know what you're saying. Excuse me.
Sorry, I'm like the same. I've got like, my kids have had a cold all week and like they got better and now I've caught it. I'm just like, thanks guys.
Yeah, right. Classic mom stuff.
So like, I really loved how strong and fierce Val was, but like I think there's like such a good cast of like really strong female characters specifically in the book. And was that like, was it important to you to include them, or did they sort of just happen to fall into place when you were writing it?
So when I did set out to write it, I did specifically remember when I was drafting the original, thinking I wanted it equal. I wanted there to be equal boys and equal girls. Well, when I got into the editing process, a lot of characters got cut that were actually in the journey, and most of them were men. And so when that happened, I didn't go out of my way to make the others men again. They were already who they were in my story, and I wasn't going to take them and their personalities that I had fallen in love with in drafting them originally and replace it and make them boys. And like Val's was a very conscious choice to make her so like fierce and independent, because her story really wouldn't work if she weren't. But I grew up in a family of mostly women. I have only sisters and a mom, and then I was raised with my cousins most of the time, who were mostly girls. And I've just been fortunate in having an experience with lots of wonderful female role models, and I feel like that just finds its ways into my book, because I know that's what I've had a lot of experience with, and I have a lot of love for those people in my life, and I think it just worms its way into my books.
I love that. I think you have like a really good way of capturing like that sort of like family, big extended family dynamic with like Val, and like kind of like a found family sort of thing. Which is always, found family is just always so fun. And seeing like how she sort of bounced off like everybody. And like, I really loved the balance between like Alik, and who was quite like a soft kind of character, but like not in a way that's a weakness, just is his sort of like his balance for her.
Yeah, his personality really.
Yeah.
He was like, I did set out to make him sort of Valeria's foil. So usually that is what I try to do, because I feel like those are what make the best relationships when you're reading about them, even when you're in them. You know, it helps to have somebody who's, one, not afraid to call you out, and two, will help you fix it. Like they'll call you out, but they will also help you fix it.
Yeah, I think they had such an interesting dynamic, because I loved like he was always very true to like his honesty to her was like such a good, like even though like it was quite like they had a lot to lose between them, he kind of stuck to the heart of like his values and what he felt was important and how much he cared for her, even as she went through like some difficult decisions.
Yeah, right. She would be a difficult person to love, but so am I. So, you know, I feel that.
Yeah, and like, I think it's nice to show like difficult people need love too. And like, it's kind of, you know, like the tolerance that he sort of showed. I mean, not always. Like, I think he justifiably probably got frustrated in like some of the things she
Definitely
did.
Definitely the sequel, for sure.
Yeah, like Alik is like everybody reading books with like characters like Val and Letter. And it's just like, oh my God, why are you doing this? And it's just like, yes,
exactly.
the sole voice of reason.
That's why it was actually really fun to write Alik in the sequel, because, you know, I had to walk a very shaky line between like moral posturing and like being true to oneself, and with him. But it ended up being very fun to write somebody who was so honest. Honesty is actually a very important thing to me, and I think that's probably why I gave him that trait.
Yeah,
is because I really feel like it's so important, and I'm really glad that came across, because he was meant to be like kind of this almost a moral compass in the sequel. So I'm glad that came across the right way.
Yeah, I think it was a really good way to sort of show like perspective on what she was doing and her arc without it being like a judgment as well, because I don't know, he was really fun. And you're right, it's always really cool when you can write a relationship between characters where they're very like opposites attract, and seeing how they react to different things and the choices they make. It's always, as a writer and the reader, it's always a lot of fun to see how that plays out.
Especially like, when you know where it's going, but you want to know how it gets there.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's my favorite type of book, is the one where you're like, okay, I'm just gonna read because I want to see like these characters kiss, and like the journey of like how it's gonna end up is just that's always
how
really
I was
fun.
with the most recent season of Bridgerton. I was like, I know what's gonna happen, but how does it happen? I want to know.
Like, I'm invested in the journey. Yes. It's always good. Like they're my favorite type of like any kind of media to consume. It's just like the romantic tension side of things, or even like the friendship dynamic tension. It's really good fun.
It is. It really is.
So without spoilers, if possible, what was your favorite scene to write in, I guess, either book, if it's easier to pick from the first?
In the first book, it was the ending scene, where I feel like I can probably say, since it is the first book, when she accepts the Pale God's deal to become, powerful. I just really loved writing that scene. It was so much fun, because that's when she kind of, just kills everyone. And I won't say it was so fun to do that, but it really was.
I think it's really satisfying to see like a character seize power as well. Like that's
exactly.
Yeah.
And then in the sequel, I liked, my favorite part was another one where she finally showed like all of her power, and it's when she was freeing one of the prisons, and later in the book, and she kind of loses herself to the power and kind of, does some really bad stuff. And I thought that was really interesting and fun to write. Like, that was probably my favorite scene, just to get all the emotions right, and like how I saw it in my mind onto the page, because I saw it so clearly. So I think that was probably my favorite scene to write.
Cool. I remember that like those prison sort of escape scenes were so like cinematic and very like vivid, and it was such a good way to sort of show like her internal sort of workings while showing like a really big, I don't know, to me like it was like watching a movie. I like those sort of scenes.
Yeah, that actually means
it plays out really cinematically.
Because when I write, I do see stuff like super, super clearly in my head, and I think maybe that's why I have.
Me too. I mean, I guess like I know there's some people who have like different levels of like visualizing, but like for me, I'd always like, especially like those really key scenes, they always play out like I'm watching a film.
Right.
And
exactly. And then you just gotta get every detail, and then that's the frustrating part.
Yeah, it's like how to get this from my brain onto the page, and like that's why drafting is always so hard. I'm like, why cannot this fully formed book just make itself happen? So what is your writing process like? Did it take you very long to write The Bright and the Pale, or?
The Bright and the Pale, no. I wrote it actually during NaNoWriMo, like National Novel Writing Month, in 2015, I believe it was then, or 2016. And so I wrote like 60,000 words of it during that month.
Wow.
Then needed a break because that was a lot. And then finished it the month following. So the drafting process for Bright and the Pale was very short. And then the editing process took forever, as you know.
Yeah.
Actually, it was very similar for Wrath and Mercy. Like I feel like drafting is my strong suit. I can get the words on the page really quickly. It's refining it in a way where it finally makes sense for readers and me. That usually takes a little bit longer. So altogether, for Wrath and Mercy, it took me about 3 months to write it, and then I revised it for about 3 months, and then I did all the revisions with my editor. So yeah, About 6 months. That's the short
That's
answer.
That's really good. I feel like being quick at drafting is such a good thing to have as an author, because I think most people are the opposite, where they struggle a lot to draft. I think I'm getting better the more that I stop fighting it. Like, I keep sort of looking for a way to get around it being difficult. And I remember seeing, like, I think it was Leigh Bardugo interviewed and saying there's no way to escape like the process.
No.
And I'm like, well, if Leigh Bardugo hasn't figured it out, then I'm just going to trust the
I really have to work hard to tell myself it doesn't have to be perfect. I think that's really where it struggles. And once I finally get into the story, which usually takes about 3 chapters, where like the basically hyper focus on this story will finally kick in. But I definitely have to sink into the world and stop second guessing myself. And that is always a process, I feel like, you need to get over, because it gets like the mind game is really what
it is. And I feel like the further you go as an author, like maybe even the worse it gets, because you kind of like, the process, and you also know there's people waiting to read it. So I definitely found it was a lot harder to get out of my own head when I was drafting Forestfold than when I wrote Lake Sedge. Like that blissful joy of like writing your first like unaged and uncontracted book, compared to like writing something on contract where people are waiting to read it, which is like an amazing blessing. But at the same time, it's just like, oh my goodness, what pressure.
Yeah, exactly. So much pressure.
It's good and bad, but I think it's probably something that like you always kind of navigate as an author, and like having friends who are writers helps a lot, because you can kind of like quietly scream at each other as you
we get through it together.
Yeah, it's really good to know that it's like, it's kind of your brain telling you the wrong thing versus like it actually being the truth, that like this first draft is not perfect, and so it means it's a terrible story.
Yes, and throw it all away. Restart.
Yeah. So for my final question about your book, what do you hope readers will take away from reading the duology?
That anger can be a strength and a weakness, but that it can be a strength, because I feel a lot of times that anger is painted as bad, especially in girls. So I hope that people, maybe girls like me, who were angry teens growing up and, just never got to see themselves in a book, will, kind of take that away and understand that while the world can tell you that it is a weakness, it can also be a big strength, and you can do a lot of things with it.
I love that. I feel so strongly about like that whole sort of, I think the way that like women especially are kind of raised to see like what's idealized as like good behavior is being kind of compliant and quiet and, well behaved and not angry. But whether that sort of serves you well in life or not, I don't know. And like, it's sort of like there's a place for being angry and having strength and like letting yourself be messy and have emotions. Like, that doesn't mean you're a bad person or like a bad. Yeah, I think as a parent, especially, I've noticed that a lot more, like this sort of realizing like what people take as good doesn't necessarily translate into like being like a fully formed like member of society, adult, whatever. Yeah, I don't know.
Talking about this the other day.
I think we were too. Yeah.
It's just, that's really, I feel like, especially after the pandemic, even, I know there's been a lot of talk about how awful kids are after it. And I'm like, they've just lived through something really bad. Like, it was just as bad for them as it was for parents and everyone else. So I feel like there probably are a lot of angry kids out there right now. So maybe my book will find them. Maybe. And they'll be able to do something with it.
I feel like very strongly about writing books for like, like the messy, chaotic, angry, imperfect kids. And like, hopefully they do find the books and see something of themselves in there. And I love that answer. So that was all of the questions that I had. Did we want to switch over to see if the audience had any questions now? Or here we go.
Hi.
Hi.
So fun so far to listen to. We do have some questions. So And feel free, everyone, to jump in with more questions. The first one is, and actually it's kind of for both of you. Jessica, you can start us off because it's knowing that your duology is like finished. That's the point of the duology, right? Like, what do you miss about these characters? What do you miss about spending time with them?
Oh, that is an excellent question.
That is such a good question.
That is excellent. I miss, well, and for the sequel, I miss being able to write a character that has so much power. Like, it was so fun to write somebody who basically had unlimited power and could do whatever they wanted. And now that I have to dial that back and restrain my next character, it's a little bit of a bummer. It's a little bit of a step back from what I was working on. So, yeah, I think that's probably what I missed. It was really fun.
And Lindell, for you, what do you, well, I was thinking of Lake's Edge, but if there's a different book that you miss more from, like, what has that experience been like for you?
I mean, I'm also in a similar position where I'm in the very end stages of finishing my duology. So Forestfall, the sequel to Lake's Edge, comes out in late September. And yeah, like, it's been really emotional because, like, these are like the characters that sort of came up with me. Like, this is the book that I got an agent with, that I got my book deal with. Like, they're kind of like the characters in the story that made me into a writer. And it feels really like kind of bittersweet to be finished with their story, like, and know that, like, there isn't more to tell, like, even though, like, I like to imagine what they go off and do after the story's finished. It's like, it's a really, like, lovely and bittersweet moment to sort of just be leaving behind this world that I've spent like 3-4 years of my life immersed in, and move on to new things. So yeah, I'm gonna miss them. I'm gonna miss, like, like, pretty much, like, I've spent like so much time thinking about these characters in the world and, like, how they would relate to things. And it's going to be, like, weird and lovely to get to know, like, a new cast of characters when I do start working on, like, a completely different book.
Yeah, I always think it's so interesting to hear authors share about that aspect, because I know, like I feel like we talk about how a reader can go through, like, a book hangover, that we, like, we miss the characters that we've just spent time with. And then I'm like, well, when you actually think about it, like, the amount of time that we spent with characters is usually way shorter than the amount of time that you all spent with your characters. And so I'm like,
yeah,
it's so sad when you, like, don't hang out with them every day.
Drafting Lake's Edge, Lindell, because for Bright and the Pale, it was like 2015, 2016. So it's been a long time. I didn't even think about that.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, well, Lake's Edge was like, so the original idea that I had for it was a short story that I wrote in like 2006-ish, maybe. I keep saying 10 years ago, but it's like longer than that now. And I think I sort of seriously sat down to write it in about 2017 was when I 2018 was when I started drafting it. So it sold in early 2019. And then, yeah, so like, it's been like a really long kind of journey to get here. It feels really strange. And like, the process of Forestfall has been so much shorter that it's sort of like, it feels really quick. It's like, oh, I felt like I had ages still, and now it's almost all done. So yeah, it's weird and nice at the same time to be coming out of the other side of it.
I love that. Kind of continuing on that train of thought of talking about your characters, what is the character that surprised you the most as you were writing them, or like that their story took a turn in the way that you like didn't realize it was going to happen until, like, I don't know if sometimes I feel like authors discuss that their characters like wrote themselves and they feel like ghostwriters because they're like, I felt like I had to just like get it out, and then I was like shocked by what happened and it was like not part of the plan. So do either of you have that experience, or like did it happen in a different way?
Yes, 100% with the sequel. So in the original draft of The Bright and the Pale, Alik, the person Val falls in love with, dies, and he stayed dead in the original draft. My editor made me change it so that he came back to life, but he was supposed to be dead. So I had some issues going into the sequel because I didn't know what to do with him. I had never once thought he was supposed to be there. So when I was writing his plot, I was like, well, he has to do something. And I had him have ties back to the guild they used to work for. And the character that he contacted there just came out of left field. Like, I did not expect him whatsoever. But for whatever reason, when I introduced him, I was like, oh, he's like a main player. He ended up becoming, everyone thought I had written a love triangle. I didn't originally, but then that's what it ended up being, because everyone's like, the subtext is there. And
He was one of my favorites.
He was a complete surprise. I never expected to write him at all, but I'm really glad I did. He was one of my favorites. He's absolutely my favorite in the second book.
I love that he shows up and he's like, you didn't expect me to be here, but I'm here now, and I'm also going to be part of a love triangle. And
I know. I was like, where did you even come from?
That's hilarious. Lyndall, do you have a similar experience at all?
I'm trying to think. I think for me, it was more that, so I'd sort of gone through many revisions of Lake's Edge, and it was originally going to be a standalone. It wasn't until like it was picked up by a publisher, like after it had already sold, that they were like, oh, actually, could you make it into a series? And so there was a few kind of minor like characters and character relationships which I had cut or changed because there just wasn't enough room to explore them in book one. But having like the two books together gave it a lot more room to sort of stretch out. So like that's like, I can't really say who it was because it's a spoiler, but they one of my favorite, like bringing them into book two was one of my favorite things. And also in book two, I think because I needed to write more characters to sort of populate like the story, there was some other characters who had connections to the Lord Under who came in, and like they were kind of just a very like, oh, I wonder like what if I do this, and suddenly like they became such a cool part of the story. And yeah, writing their interactions with like the Lord Under and with Letta was like really good fun. So I'm excited for readers to meet them when they read Forest Falls.
I know exactly who you're talking about too.
Just like, I got the inside track. I'm there. I'm on it. Oh my gosh. Actually, and kind of going down, both of you are segueing so nicely into the questions that people are asking. Because you kind of mentioned the things that changed as a result of your editors. Is there anything that was edited out that you still think about?
Yes, for me.
Can you tell us what it is? Yeah.
I can. I just have to, watch how I say it. So as I said before, my editor had me cut several characters from the book. And in doing that, it took a lot away from the middle portion of the book where there were a lot of character moments. And I always felt like that really did a disservice to my debut, to The Bright and the Pale. And yeah, I really wish that some of those things that had been cut had not, because I feel like it just fleshed out the characters more and made them feel more real. And, they were just axed unceremoniously. So I miss them.
It's hard too, because like there's always like so many different ways to tell a story, and like it's hard when like you have a vision and like the end vision isn't quite what you always imagine, but it still works. But then like the vision you had in your heart is a little bit different. I think like for me, like the very early version of Lake's Edge, which it's sort of like it has kind of like the seeds have made it into the final version, but it was never going to work as like a book. Like it just didn't make narrative sense, but I still have like so much fondness for like that messy version of the story. Like there was a character that came into it who was like a witch hunter, and he looked like Cullen from Dragon Age. And like,
what, you cut that, Lyndall?
I had
disrespect.
I know. Maybe I'll have to put him in another book. Yeah. So like he kind of got replaced by Thea, because he and
I like them
meant
too.
to have. Yeah, so like originally, like he and Clover were meant to be sort of paired off in like whatever, like if it turned into a series. And then like he because originally there was like Templar sort of type characters that were hunting down people who could do alchemy. So that plot didn't really fit with the story in the end, when I had to simplify all the world building. But I miss him. Like, he was fun. I can't even remember what his name was. I think I might have even just called him Cullen, and it was like I was like, I will give you a better name when this gets published. No, wait. His name was Tenor, which is like such a terrible name, because I was like, I can't call this character Cullen. Like, I need to think of a better name. So he was never going to fit, but I miss him.
This is truly my favorite question to ever ask authors, because I'm sorry, I feel like it does bring up painful memories sometimes of like the editing process, but it's so fascinating because like I don't know if either of you have also read Sabaa Tahir's fantasy series.
Yes, I love it.
Listen, we found out when we interviewed her that there was a dragon in book 3 and it got cut.
We were robbed.
That's a big change.
Yeah. And like everyone in the crowd, like literally, there were like audible gasps when we were like, who told you that we didn't want a dragon? Like, we would have taken the dragon. And then she started to describe the dragon to us because she was like, thanks, guys. I cared about the dragon too. And so she told us more about him. And we were like, what the so thank you for sharing. I'm sorry that we had to bring up some of your characters that we all deeply miss. I hope that we see them in future books, and then we can be like, we heard about them, we knew they existed, they have the right fit, yeah, but they're here, we've got it. Something else that I think is really interesting that I wanted to ask both of you, I've been looking forward to this for a lot of reasons, but definitely one of this question as well. Why YA fantasy? I guess let's start there, and I might have a follow-up, but like, why did you choose to write in the YA fantasy space?
Fantasy has always been like my bread and butter ever since I was a kid. It was where I gravitated. I didn't want to read anything else. I very specifically remember my dad taking me to a bookshop when I was about 13. And this, I guess, was before YA fantasy was a thing, obviously, because I'm not ancient, but it was before it was a thing. And he was like, well, now that you're older, you have to read like, other books. And he made me buy a different book. Never read it. I never read it. And I just went back to reading fantasy again. He never tried to make me again. I think he realized that it just wasn't going to happen. Writing and reading has always been sort of my escape. I don't want to read about the real world. I live in the real world. So I wanted to always read fantasy. And then when I started to write, it was just naturally where I went. And in terms of YA, I feel like that, how do I say this in a way that's not rude? I feel like teens are really undervalued. Like, I really do. I don't think anybody takes them seriously because they're not quite adults, but they're not kids either. And I don't know, something about that speaks to me. I feel like maybe I feel the same way or something, but then when I sat down to write, there was never like a question. I wanted to write for teens. I didn't try to do anything else. So it's just where my heart is, I guess.
I love that. I found like, so the Australian literary scene is very like literary highbrow focused. And I've had people sort of be like, oh, why did you choose to write for like young people? Like, do you think you'll ever do like a real novel? And I'm like, this is like, it's like, it was a choice. I didn't write young adult because I was incapable of writing an adult book. Like, I wanted to write for teens. So yeah, it's funny. Like, I think that's sort of like some of the undervaluing is, I think it's getting better, but definitely, there's been people they were like, oh, like it was like, like you when I tell people I'm a writer and they're like, oh, you write children's books, and I'm just like, well, teenagers deserve good books. So
yeah, right. How are they supposed to read books in the future if they don't like books when they're teenagers?
Exactly. I should say that like most people are very supportive, but it's just, I think it's kind of like the it's strange how like stuff that's seen as like genre fiction doesn't seem to be like weighted the same as serious books, because I really love reading YA. It was funny, like as like a young adult, I read a lot of Australian YA authors like Margot Lanigan and Sonia Hartnett. And so I grew up with like those being quite a big inspiration. But as like a sort of early 20s young adult, I read mostly adult fiction, like a lot of classics, like I remember like, I think like, you know, like James Joyce and Vladimir Nabokov and all of those sort of things. And it wasn't until I was older that I kind of, after I'd had children, I found it really hard to focus on reading, and I didn't read anything for a really long time. And I think I picked up, it might have even been something like A Court of Thorns and Roses or something really like like that. And I read it and I was just like, I fell so back in love with it. And I loved like the heightened emotions and the romance. And it was just everything that I'd always wanted in a book that I'd sort of struggled to find in some of the adult fantasies that I picked up. Although I love now that there's like such a good crossover between like adult YA. Like it's really, really cool seeing more of those books coming out. So yeah, I think it was just like, it was what I enjoyed reading. And so it was what I gravitated to as wanting to write. But I love how like ever present you can be when you're writing like a character with that sort of voice, like that time where all your emotions are so heightened and you're making such like emotion-based decisions. And it's just really fun as an author.
I really agree. And I guess I started pursuing publication when I was 18. Did not happen, clearly. But I think maybe also when I was writing and drafting that book, that I was 16, 17 when I was writing it. And so obviously I was embroiled in Twilight at that time because, you know, we all were. Most of us were, I should say. And I just was like, yeah, I can do this in my little teenage brain. And so, yeah, I wrote a book, and I feel like just because that's what I was living at the time, it was just naturally YA. And I never went away from it because, frankly, I think YA books are better, like just entertaining for me personally.
Yeah.
But
I definitely read a big mix, especially now. Like,
so.
I find that I go outside of my genre to read for pleasure a lot more now. Like, I read a lot of adult thrillers and romances and nonfiction and all sorts of things that I probably would never feel like compelled to write, and it makes it like a nice brain break to read, you know, like Gillian Flynn, because I'm not comparing myself to her thinking, oh, how am I going to do this? But I love writing like the craft of YA, and like the readership are really lovely to engage with.
I agree.
I think your comments are so important, because I think something that we definitely see as booksellers is kind of this less so from teens, I guess you should say, but definitely like because I'm of the mindset that YA is for everyone. I think YA is for teens, like writing something that is important, like you mentioned, Jessica, so that when you get older, like you enjoy reading, and it's like,
very important to me.
Yes, and also there's so many YA stories that are so fun to read as an adult, for also a variety of reasons. And and especially YA fantasy, I'm like, listen, I don't have time to learn a whole new magic system or world system in a way that is like 700 pages long. Like, YA fantasy authors figure out how to teach you. That doesn't mean they're not more complex or any less complex. Just like, I feel like YA fantasy authors, like, you get it down, you give me a magic system, or like, you know, something that a world build that is very accessible while also being very complex and wonderful. And like, it's a gift of YA fantasy writers.
No, I completely agree with you. I actually remember when I sold The Bright and the Pale, a lot of the editors I talked to about it told me it was really accessible. And I had done that on purpose because there are so many people I met who loved Lord of the Rings when it came out, but couldn't read the book, liked the Harry Potter movies, but were intimidated by how long they were. And then even if they did read them, didn't want to read any other fantasy, because how do you go from how easy to understand Harry Potter to like The Hobbit, or not The Hobbit, I guess that's the simpler one, but like the Lord of the Rings and everything. And so when I sat down to write, I was like, you know, that's such a shame, because it's so fun, and it can be so fun if you just open the door a little bit so other people can read it too. And so that's always been something I'm very conscientious about, because I don't want somebody to be skimming my writing because I'm describing some family crest for 7 years. Like, it's really important to me to like make it accessible and condensed in a way that's like bite-sized world building, basically, because like I said, it's just such a shame. Fantasy can be fun, people, I promise.
So much fun. Yeah, George R.R. Martin, like, he is a master I am not in any way saying anything bad about him, but I like picked up the first book because I was like, this is an amazing show. I want to be like, you know, I want to be somebody who has done both because I know there's things that are different that just don't translate to screen. And then I was like, listen, we had a good 30 pages together, but I'm never picking you up again, to be honest.
Honestly, that's what I did too.
I love that series. See, I don't know. I read it all when I was on maternity leave before I had my first baby. So maybe that was like the last time in my life that I've ever had that much free time. And I was like, when I couldn't sleep, I used to listen to like a podcast called Radio Westeros that talked about all the lore. And for the first few seasons of the show, there used to be this podcaster who did like book to show episodes. So like you'd watch the TV show episode and then they talk about how it measured up to the book, well, how it fit with the book. And then when the show kind of got away from the books, it got less fun. But we had a good run for a while. But yeah, I love that series. But I agree. Like, I think it's like there's space for everyone. Like, not everybody either wants to or has the ability to sit down and focus on, like, you know, the Song of Ice and Fire series, which is like very long and complex.
Just intense. She's an intense.
And yeah, like it's nice to sort of be able to just have like, and I think that was partly why I enjoyed reading YA so much as like a new mom too. Like, I didn't have the time or the focus to sort of commit to immersing myself in a book, because like often I'm reading things at like, you know, 5-10 minute snatches of time before I get interrupted. And so like I do, like there's a lot of adult fantasy books that I'd really love to read that I sort of have tried, and I'm just like, I need to come back to this when I have the time to focus on it. So that's it. There's like some, like, I really found Gideon the Ninth quite accessible, even though that's
it was really
that was such a fun read. I love that so much. So I think, yeah, like that's what I mean. Like, there's getting to be more like cool kind of crossover, like fantasy where it's got like the fast pace and character focusedness of YA without being like super dry and adult, but it's still either it's like more subversive or it gets you into the story a bit more deeper, or I don't know. I love it. It's been really fun to watch like the landscape changing.
Yeah. Well, and something else that you said, Jessica, too, that I was thinking about when you were talking, Lindell, is how we like tend to underestimate teenagers. And one thing that I'm excited about, which kind of leads into my next question, is the way in which the landscape seems to be changing. Even within YA, of like the things that we are covering in YA. Like just today, we were telling somebody else about a book because they hadn't heard about this, but This Rebel Heart is historical fiction, YA, set, I believe, post-Hungarian War or during the Hungarian War. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but it also, we know at some point, polyamory is a topic that is discussed, and like very exciting that the YA genre is kind of it feels like we're opening up, that we are having more experiences that are showcased too in a way that is still like very much age appropriate. You know, we still get our like 12 plus or 13 plus age categories, but it's very fun to see why I feel like it's expanding in that way as well. So like from both of you, like what is most exciting to you, or like what do you hope most to see from the YA genre as it continues to grow and evolve?
That's an excellent question. I guess I would hope I would see more stories, and I've seen a couple of like our POC like author friends talk about how a lot of POC books that tend to get picked up by publishers focus on like their trials and tribulations, and I would love to see a book where they just got to be happy. And I know a lot of like POC authors want the same thing, where the colors of the character's skin is just sort of that's just how they look. It's not necessarily a talking point in the book. And I feel like I would love that for them to be able to do that and finally get the chance to just write the free and fun books they want to.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I've really loved seeing the trend. I mean, it's not a trend, like I shouldn't say that. Like the the trend of publishing to sort of being more open to like different types of stories now, like in terms of like more experimental narratives, like age groups of things, like the college YA sort of this, like, you know, like I love how it's become sort of more flexible in terms of like what is being seen as like a story that people are going to want to read, because yeah, like it's nice for everybody to have like such a big breadth of options, whether it's like representations of like race or sexual orientation and things like that. I hope it continues to become more and more expansive, and that we get to see all sorts of stories from all sorts of people. And yeah,
I'm really excited. I hope that we can see that. I definitely I will say it's not YA, but I am really loving. I just got a chance to early preview it. This goes back to something else we said way a while ago, but Kaylin Bayron of YA fame has a middle grade debut coming out that is vampires, and I am so excited. I was like, we're getting the resurgence of the vampire. My Twilight teenage are just like glowing. I'm just thrilled. Couldn't be happier. And it features a diverse cast, but it's like a fun story, and I am excited that publishing seems to have.
Yeah, I mean, I love seeing like publishing sort of circling back to stuff like the old favorites of like vampires or paranormal romance or something, but it's like with this added sort of newness to it of like diverse stories or like diverse ways of telling the story and things like that. It's really cool to see.
I hope paranormal comes back too. I've got a ghost hunter book in the trunk.
Bring her out, Jessica. I want her, like, just, I'm ready.
Oh, yeah, I love
whatever you want to bring that.
Ghost Hunting Sisters, who ran a YouTube channel. I thought it was great. No one else did when I queried it, but I did.
Let's try that again. Okay, well, we have gotten to one of my favorite portions of our evening, which is time for this or that. And there is very few rules, nothing to be nervous about. The only rule is if you don't like either of the options, you have to provide the alternative third option. But I think you're gonna like our options that we have this evening. They're a little bit themed. The first one is more about aesthetic, but it kind of makes sense with the books. So for this or that, are you Gothic aesthetic or cottage core?
Ooh, I'm cottage core. I know I am.
I think I'll be Gothic.
High five. I knew you were going to say that too. You should really see my living room right now, though. It's like bright goldenrod yellow. We got like flowers hanging in there. Like it's straight cottage core over there.
I know what's going on. Love it. It sounds gorgeous, by the way. That sounds great. I think it's a great vibe. Okay, well, this goes back to Bridgerton, which I feel like we might have to have a side tangents about. But are you slow burn or insta love?
Slow burn. I want to feel the pain of it.
Lyndall, do they have Bridgerton in Australia?
Yeah, I didn't. I watched the first season. I haven't actually had time to watch the second season, but I feel like I know from like seeing everybody's like recommendations. Also, I'm a really big like Regency romance like novel fan, so I read like a lot of Tessa Dare and things like that. So
the slow burn works for you. Yeah,
slow burns definitely, or like maybe like insta love, but then it's like a slow burn because they can't admit their feelings.
Oh yeah, I like that too.
The best of both worlds.
Jessica, did you? This is just one follow-up question. I swear we'll get back to this or that, people, but we can't let a Bridgerton moment go past. Did you like the slow burn of season 2, or was it too slow of a burn?
I actually did like it. And I was surprised because Anthony was my least favorite character last season. And so I was like, oh God, like I'm gonna have to watch a whole season of him. But they did an excellent job of really explaining why his character is the way he is, which made him so endearing. And then that in combination with this kind of slow burn, and you've seen what she brings out in him and how like that, it made it gratifying to me because you saw like why they actually fell in love. I actually enjoyed it. I know some people didn't, but I did.
I know there's a lot of wild thoughts and opinions flying around.
I know.
No, our bookseller Cassie totally agrees with you. She was like, "Oh, that just really worked for me," and I agree with you. I think the slow burn is great. I maybe could have used it condensed into 6 episodes instead of 8 with the storyline that we went with, but who am I to critique? Who am I? I'm nobody. So,
I know exactly what you're saying, though. I know exactly what you're saying.
Okay, thank you for entertaining my side.
Yeah, no problem.
Staying on this, which a good Regency romance. Tessa Dare, what a goddess.
I know.
Are you enemies to lovers or friends to lovers?
I like both.
I like those too, but I tend to write enemies to lovers. I'd love to try writing a friends to lovers book. I think that would be like a really fun challenge. I'm such a fan for a good enemies to lovers though.
I have never written anything other than friends to lovers.
Oh,
I
really?
think because like my husband and I met in high school, and we were friends first because I'm like a very mistrustful person, so I'm not gonna go out of my way to like find somebody. And I think that's just naturally where I gravitate towards because it's what I know. But my newest book I'm drafting is Rivals to Lovers, and that has been my favorite by far. I love it. I love writing arguments. They're so fun.
Listen, the sexual tension that you can get across in an argument,
unbeatable.
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, final question. Very much themed to YA fantasy. So, if you're on a long journey, or your characters are on a long journey, are you choosing between taking their restful stop at a tavern, a nice little pub or tavern, or are you like, let's go up that long hill to the mysterious looking castle that is certainly going to lead to so much trouble?
I'm going to the castle.
Yeah, I think the castle too.
And I can like say for certain that I would choose that even in real life because like my family was like the typical white people family. So when we saw like an abandoned house, we were like, let's go inside of it.
What?
So I know for sure and certain that is what I would pick. Yeah.
The fact that you're still here with us today.
I know. It's amazing, honestly. And then the fact it was my parents' idea too. They're like, you girls will be fine.
Lacking a sense of self-preservation is what I'm coming across to me for both of you. If we're both I offered you, I think, teed it up as a nice little tavern. You're having like maybe a nice little warm meal, a drink, and you both chose the castle.
100%.
I didn't even have to think about it. That's like what an interesting personality quiz this has been.
That is hilarious. It's true. Although I think that I also would choose the castle. I think there's something that just draws you to it. So, well, this has been such an incredible way again to spend. I know that you have very different weather than us, Lindell, but it's been such an incredible way to spend such a dreary, dark and rainy night for those of us in the Midwest. So thank you both so much. I want to highlight to everyone watching, first of all, thank you so much for being here. Second of all, we have all of these incredible books that were discussed tonight by these amazing authors at the bookstore. If you are not in St. Louis, or you don't want to come out in the rain, we ship to you also. So you can find all of those online. And yeah, we would be happy to get these books in your hands because we are certain that you will want them there. Do either of you want to say anything before we leave for the evening?
Just thank you so much. This was such a fun event.
Thank you for hosting. It's been really lovely. Like, what a wonderful way to start. For me, it's the start of the day with chatting about books, and I love this or that question, so it was great fun.
Oh, thank you so much. You are both incredible. This was an amazing conversation. Again, thank you so much to our audience, and we'll see everyone maybe next time, and maybe we'll see some of these characters that we lost out on in the.
Yeah.
We better, Lindell. We better.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.